I did deliveries for a popular fast food place in my town during the end of my high school years. My friends all had jobs there too, but they purposefully scheduled us on separate shifts to prevent us from goofing off. It ruined all the fun, but the money was still nice to have. Mostly I would have no interesting stories about my work days, but this one night was an outlier. It was the weekend, and I was working until 10. The orders were coming in steady, so I was doing delivery after delivery. I was going in, grabbing the bag, driving to the house, and repeating that process non-stop. I think it was around 9 when I got this weird order, but I can't say for sure, because I was kind of mindlessly running the deliveries at this point. I got the bag and pulled up the GPS location for the address, and then I started driving again. Halfway through the drive, I realized this was taking me in a different direction than usual. I'd been this way before, but there weren't a ton of houses over here, so most orders would be in the other direction. I drove, not thinking too much of it, until I saw on the GPS that I was 1 minute away. Looking around, I didn't know a single place I could be 1 minute away from. There was nothing but trees and the road, no houses or shops, literally nothing. Regardless, I drove until the GPS said I'd arrived, which was just a quarter mile further down. I pulled off to the side and did one quick look around, just in case I was missing something. Then, I called the customer. The phone rang for a while before they finally picked up. "Hey, I drove to the address you put in, but it doesn't seem to be right. Can you please confirm the address?" I asked, hoping he just made a typo or something. He repeated the address back to me, but it was the same one as the one I had on my GPS. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. "Wait, I think I see you." I looked up ahead and down the road. There was a person waving at me. I drove up next to him, but had a bad feeling in my gut. I rolled down the window, and he immediately started apologizing, saying the address was tricky to find sometimes. He pointed behind him, saying his house was down that road. This road he was referring to looked more like a half-beaten dirt walking trail that went through the forest. I smiled and said it was alright. Handing him the bag through the window, he smiled back and thanked me, watching me as I pulled back onto the road as I did a U-turn. I looked at my mirror at the man still standing on the side of the road, and just thought to myself about how strange that was. Not even a minute into the drive, something started to feel wrong. My car was bumpy and leaning to the right, and it was getting increasingly worse by the second. It started to feel dangerous to even drive, so I had to pull over. Before doing anything else, I called roadside assistance. I didn't know what was wrong yet, or if it had anything to do with the man, but like I said, I've had a bad feeling in my gut, and I wasn't taking any chances after getting off the phone with them. I got out of my car and looked at my tires. My front right tire was busted, and that was the tire closest to where the man was standing, so I put 2 and 2 together pretty quick. I looked back down the road from where I came, and in the distance, I saw a figure walking towards me. I hurried into my car and locked the doors. He approached slowly, probably knowing the exact situation I was in. As the man got closer and closer, I contemplated whether or not to risk driving on my busted tire. But by some miracle, a truck came down the road and stopped behind me. They got out and asked if I was okay. I saw the man walking quickly back the way he came from. I took this as an opportunity to tell the man from the truck of my suspicions, and he stayed there with me until the roadside assistance truck came, which was only a minute later. I got the police involved, and I wasn't surprised to find out that the name and address the man ordered with was fake. I don't know what he was trying to do, but making me drive all the way out on an empty road like that, hidden by the forest, makes me think it would have been more than just a robbery. I was on a road trip, heading back from a job interview I had across the states. I stayed for an extra couple days, to make it a mini vacation, which was why I drove instead of taking a plane. Anyway, it was pouring outside, which would usually make for a relaxing drive. But it was the middle of the night, so it made visibility difficult. Most of the drive consisted of going through dense forest on long one-lane roads. The drive was supposed to be around 10 hours, and obviously with rain, I expected a slight delay. It was just past 1 AM when I checked my phone and saw it was 62 miles until the next turn. For some reason though, Apple Maps was taking me on a different route from the one I'd taken before. I didn't see it as a problem at all and continued for a while, maybe 30 minutes, before I glanced over at my phone again. It still said I was 62 miles away from my next turn. I looked closer, and my car wasn't even moving on the map. I tried clicking on it and restarting the app, but it was frozen on that screen. To make things worse, all it said was turn right in 62 miles, with no road or street name. Without that, I had no idea where I was going, or when to turn, other than a vague memory of a street name it had shown me before. It was one of those where if I saw the street sign, then I'd recognize and remember, but I couldn't fully remember it on my own. Despite the inconvenience, I continued driving for a while, in hopes that it was just an internet connection thing, and once I was out of the dense forest, it would fix itself. An hour or so of driving later, I was still in the forest, and the rain was still pouring down, but I saw an intersection coming up. On the connecting street, there was a truck parked on the side, and I figured they were probably having the same problem I was having. I slowed down and looked at the street sign, and to my surprise, I thought I actually recognized it. It could have been just some coincidence or false memory due to my lack of sleep, but I ended up turning and taking my chances. At first I was fairly confident in my choice, thinking I might have actually made the right call, but after an hour of driving, I was still in the forest. I knew for sure that I didn't spend even nearly this much time driving through the forest on the way there, so something was wrong. I checked my phone again and still had no luck, but up ahead I saw a faint glow of a billboard sign of a motel, right there in the middle of the isolated forest. It seemed like an odd choice for a motel, but I pulled into the parking lot so I could safely figure out my situation. The whole lot was empty, not a single car. A minute later though, that same truck I'd seen back at the intersection pulled in and parked a few spots down. I couldn't see much through the rain, so I just ignored them and continued to try to get my phone to work. I want to say I probably sat there for 15 minutes before giving up. Just before deciding to go into the motel, to either ask for help or get a room, a knock on my window startled me. "Hey, can you help me?" he yelled through the rain. I rolled down the window just a crack, letting the rain splash all over me as I asked what he wanted. He said he needed some directions. He told me a very specific address, as if I were to know where it was. "Sorry man, I'm just as lost as you are." He frowned, and then smiled, and said to have a nice night, walking back through the rain to his truck. After a minute, I got out and ran into the motel. The front room was dark and empty. Nobody was at the desk. I leaned over the counter to see if someone was in the back, but then, the front door opened behind me. I turned, and I saw that man from the truck outside. He was soaked with water, dripping from his long hair and beard. The look on his face was cold and sinister, and he had one hand suspiciously shoved in his pocket. In that instant, I quickly tried walking past him. He stayed firmly in my way, but for whatever reason, he didn't stop me from squeezing past him and out the door again. As I quickly walked to my car, I heard the man exit the building behind me and his footsteps catching up to me. I got in and turned on my car, just as the man came up to my window. And through the rain, I heard the sound of my door latch click. Thank God my car auto-locks, because as soon as I heard that and looked up at him, he stared at me with disturbingly rage-filled eyes and began to forcefully trying to open the door. He was pulling so hard, the entire car was rocking back and forth. I pulled out and drove off so fast I almost ran him over. I got back to the intersection and sped down the way I was going before. Thankfully, I made it to a city after 20 miles, and I was able to get help. It turned out the motel I was at was closed down a couple of months back, and for some reason, the sign still worked, which nobody could explain to me. I don't know what that man's intentions were, and whether or not he had planned the whole thing. But one thing I am sure of is that I got very lucky with my escape from that motel that evening. I just gotten out of work at 11 p.m. and I was heading back to my house. It's about a 45-minute drive to get home usually, as I live several miles outside of the city. It's always very quiet, and the roads are pretty empty once I start to get further out and closer to home. I always enjoy the drives back from work. I found them peaceful, and just a nice way to wind down after a long day. I was 20 minutes away from home, and just turned down a long side road that pretty much leads directly to my house. This was my usual route home that I'd been taking for years now, and had never had anything happen before. I will admit though, it was a bit of a creepy road at night. It was very dimly lit, and the side of the roads were surrounded by a dense forest. Not to mention it would often get foggy during the later hours of the night, making things only visible within a few feet ahead. Again though, barely anyone is on this road at night, and there's no turns or anything, so visibility is never too much of an issue. A couple minutes down the road, I see through the fog a small blinking light. I couldn't really tell how far ahead it was, or even what side of the road it was on. I slowed down, and as I started to get closer, the light turned off completely. At this point I was maybe going 15 to 20 miles per hour, when out of the fog a small car pulls out from the side of the road and stops directly in front of me. I tried to brake, but I was too close already, and my car tapped the back of theirs. I was kind of in shock at first as to how suddenly it all happened, but I noticed neither of our cars really had much damage. Not really knowing what to do, I opened my door and stood beside my car waiting for them to get out as well. I could see them moving around in the front seat, but I couldn't tell what they were doing. As I stood there, I looked at his car, noticing how old and worn it was, and that the headlights were all turned off. Eventually, a man got out of the car slowly and began making his way over to me. From what I could see, he looked like a middle-aged man and was a pretty large guy. I decided to start off and asked, "Is everything okay? You pulled out pretty quick." He was acting a little strange and looking all around and never making eye contact with me. After a couple seconds he replied, "Yeah, sorry." I wasn't really sure how to respond, but he was starting to really make me uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be out on an empty road alone with him. I told him that there was no real damage to either car, so I was gonna get back on the road and head home. But as I began reaching for my car's door, he told me to wait. He wanted to check his car out for damage before I left. I said okay, and stood next to my car as he looked at his back bumper. But then he started to walk around his car, pretending to look for damage, which was really weird because I'd only tapped his back bumper. As he started to make his way to the passenger side, I saw a large figure get up in the back seat and start moving towards the door. I immediately got back in my car and locked it, as a man got out of the back door and both of them began waving their hands at me, telling me to stop. I was panicking at this point, and put the car in drive and went around them down the road. Looking in the rear view mirror, I could see their lights turn on through the fog. I could see their lights for about 30 seconds, but eventually they faded out. I pulled into a gas station that was about 5 minutes away from my house, and waited there just to make sure that they didn't follow me home. The car never passed by after waiting for about 15 minutes or so I headed back home. I decided not to call the cops at the time, as I wasn't entirely sure if I was just overreacting or not. I'm still not sure what those people really wanted, but the more I think about it, everything about the situation felt wrong. I don't know what their plan was, but part of me feels like something very dangerous was about to happen if I had not gotten out of there in time. Another part of me wishes I had reported the incident, as I find myself wondering, what if they had stopped following me so that they could try and lure someone else into their trap?